by its very nature going to be an interactive session, because the main aim of it was to introduce all the EMACS users to each other, talk about the sort of packages we use. Let's just put my slide up. So I thought we'd go around, introduce ourselves to each other, talk briefly about how long we've been using EMACS, what sort of packages we use. I put a section, are there any packages that are specifically useful for Linaro? And there's an Eatherpad for us to dump notes of interest and relevance. I can see we scared one person already.
What if 500 people said that?
I know, but I didn't think that was going to happen. Okay, so I'm Alex. I've met most of you already. I mainly run the EMACS24 branch of the EMACS repository because it's slowly approaching stabilization, but I'm running fairly bleeding edge. I've been using EMACS for 15 years now, but probably more seriously in the last 5 or 6 years when I've got particularly crazy with my customization and doing things with it. I'm quite a heavy user of the package system, so ever since package.el was introduced, I've had a lot more extra additions to my EMACS session, and I try things out all the time. So there's a couple I'll mention that I use. I use a thing called MU4E, which is a mail client for EMACS. I find it easier to use than things like News. I use an IRC package called Circ, which again does pretty much everything ERC does, but it is C-I-R-C-E. I can put those up later. And mainly because it was just a slightly looked like a newer code base and easier to tweak, and I've done some patches for that. I'm also a fairly heavy user of Helm. Does anyone else use Helm here? HELM. It used to be called anything, I think. It's basically a narrowing framework for EMACS, and you can plug it into all sorts of things. So you can. I use it mainly for things like Helm occur or searching through tag lists, but there's all sorts of plugins, including things that integrate with Spotify or Google search results. A narrowing framework. Yeah. In fact, I can show you. So, let me just put this down. Say, for example, you have a buffer. I was just going to show the Helm occur. So you bring up a occur buffer and say I want everything that's got SMT and maybe also service, and they basically narrow. It takes any list of candidates and narrows it down, but you can do it by fuzzy searching and stuff like that. And it's just useful for. But I mean, this is just one example of the type of thing that it does. It can plug into any sort of data source. So, as I say, I've seen Spotify clients, Google search results. Yeah. It's quite cool. I have also written 2 other packages. One that I wrote outside of Linaro called Edit with EMACS, which is basically a front end for Chrome-based browsers that allows you to edit text areas. And there's a back end called Edit Server, which is written in Lisp, eLisp, and that allows you to send text areas to EMACS and then edit it in EMACS and send the results back. And the final thing that I have written of note is a thing called Lava Mode, which is an EMACS mode for interacting with Lava services. And from that, and I can demo it later, I basically can edit the JSON Lava jobs, submit them to Lava. It does various things like it'll execute any embedded eLisp in the JSON, so it can extract the latest build that I've just built, or put, set a timestamp, set a timeout, so it only times out by the end of the day. And yeah, the world is your oyster. You can put whatever you like in there. It's on git.linaro.org, Lava mode. I'll put a link in the Eatherpad. So with that, we shall go around the room. Shall we start with Will?
I'm Will Newton. I'm in toolchain team. This work?
No.
Does
Testing.
this work? Yeah,
Testing.
it works. This definitely works. Does it? Yeah. Okay. Closer. Yeah, I'm in the toolchain team. Been using EMACS about 10 and a bit years. I don't actually have a date. I tend to use quite just. Do you build your own EMACS?
I built it from the source tree.
Yeah, I use the packaged EMACS and not much stuff. Git mode, the Git mode. I use that one, and NXML mode. That's always a good one that I use. But I think that's now part of EMACS. It didn't used to be.
I used to use NXML for webby stuff, and then I started using. There's another package called Web Mode, because I always found the NX HTML mode got a bit buggy. Got a bit slow.
I just use it for XML, not HTML, and I'll just have a look in my EMACS RC. Yeah. Fedora. I used to use Ubuntu, but it didn't install on this laptop when I got it, so on Fedora at the moment. But I really don't care about distributions that much. Yeah, that's about it, according to my EMACS. Yeah.
I'm Gil Pitney, and I'm just coming back to EMACS after a long hiatus, because I used to work on those machines, on the smallest machines. Pardon?
Just closer to your mouth, I think.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, so no, I mainly came by just to see what some of the experts are doing, because I haven't been using EMACS for a while. I just came back to it. I used to be a heavy user in the past, way long ago, when I was working on symbolics-less machines. So I had some of the first EMACS stuff with the proper keyboards with Piper, Meta, Super, and yeah, I'm just using it for some of the development I'm doing on OpenCL and stuff, on Chromebook and other, on Ubuntu, mainly Ubuntu.
Did you say you're using it on a Chromebook?
Yeah, Chromebook.
Just in terminal mode?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's the GUI.
Oh, is it, you're not running Chromos on it though?
Oh no, I'm sorry. This is rooted. Yeah, this is Ubuntu actually. This is Ubuntu. Running EMACS. It's a package I just sudo out that I install.
So I should just mention. So I've got a Chromebook as well. But I quite like Chromos because I like having the browser kept up to date, and I didn't feel like running an entirely separate X session with Crouton, so I've actually made some changes so you can pop up EMACS as a full screen X session in the main Chromos session, which is quite nice, and then shrink it back down.
So I just want to see what the packages were good. And, actually did have one question. Is anyone using the GDB interface? And
The Grand Unified Debugger.
In EMACS.
I've used it a couple of times. To be honest, I'm so used to using the command line in GDB, I tend to just do it in a terminal these days.
Not really worth it then.
Okay. Lee, do you want to go next?
This isn't going to be an interesting one. So my name's Lee Jones. I'm the tech lead for the ST landing team. I'm using EMACS 24 as well. Ubuntu, just install it, it's done, kept up to date. I've been using it for about 10 years. I'm a regular user. I use it for about 8-9 hours a day, but I'm not a power user. I haven't actually installed any packages. I've used org mode. I tried to get into that. I like the ethos, but I use something else instead, which I'm not going to admit to what that is.
Is it a dirty proprietary application?
No, it's nothing like that. It's just I will then. It's called Redbook, and it just keeps everything up to date. There's a calendar in the corner, so you can. I only fill it in every Monday, and I keep my status in it, and a to-do list, and I just propagate that week on week. Apart from that, I haven't tried any more packages. I'm more here to see what's around and see if it's worth me using any of these packages. I know a few people who use the mail client, which you mentioned. What's that called?
MU.
MU. Yeah. And Mars specifically. I've had a good chat with him about that. I've only just started using Mutt, and I actually quite like that, so I don't really want to move on to anything just yet. But I have considered it. So no, and no.
So one of the things I found quite useful with MU was because it's intrinsically scriptable, I can do things like apply patches straight from my email box.
I can do that with Mutt.
Yeah. By just recording shell scripts instead, I guess.
Yeah. At the moment, I really like my workflow with Mutt, so there's no real need for me to learn something new. It was quite a long and arduous learning curve learning Mutt, so I don't really want to. But I would. I don't have anything against it. I just haven't. And I'm quite happy with all my other processes as well. They seem to be going quite well. So unless I see something really uber sexy, chances are I'm not going to install any more packages or write my own.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Elias. I'm a project manager, but I've been using EMACS since '94. So I'm using version now 24.3.1 Arch Linux. I mostly use org mode and ESS, EMACS Fix Statistics for R. I'm doing a bit of R as a side project myself. And the things that I'm quite interested in the future mostly are how could I bridge org mode to Evernote, because I have a lot of stuff on Evernote. I'd like to be able to, use one interface for all my notes and bring stuff that I have from Evernote and vice versa. But I mean, org mode is what I use on a daily basis for all the notes, etc. So I don't know if you guys have had it, but I had quite a few issues with Google Docs at times, either because of connectivity, for me it just disconnects, or makes my system quite slow at times. So I revert back to using EMACS for keeping notes and all that. And I like the ability of being able to edit Jira fields with EMACS. Thank you very much. I like also to be able in the future to have I have seen there are some Jira modes, but I haven't really tried them.
I've played a little bit with the Jira. There's an org Jira plugin that is meant to. But having looked at the code, basically they took another package that also taught them XML RPC interface and then did a lot of search and replace and just hacked it around. So it does work in a simple sense, but it needs some tweaking. I've already submitted some patches upstream, which the guys accepted. So, but I've
not a Linaro guy who wrote
no, that was. There are well, there's two things. So there's a thing called Jira lib, which is just a EMACS library for talking to Jira XML RPC APIs, and then there's the org Jira bit that pulls cards down from Jira and stores them in org, and then you can update the org thing and then sync it back up. As I say, I've only had a bit of a play with it so far. I think.
What does it look like?
It's org mode. It basically gives you everything in the same way as org mode does. So you can just fold things and expand things and add attributes and tags that way.
That might be my first package to install.
Yeah, I should have mentioned I do actually use org mode as well. So I use org mode for mainly keeping notes. So I keep track of everything that I've done week to week. So when I do my weekly IRC meeting, I can just paste what I've done from there. I also use it to remind, because I'm getting old, to remember what I've done. So when I'm doing things like testing kernels, and I need to deploy a kernel up to Lava to test it, I use a org Babel shell snippet to do it, which dumps a bunch of information like what the kernel version was and when I uploaded it. So when I come back to it the following week, I can remember the last kernel I tested and what the results were.
So that's a question I have. Are there any goodies that are available for Linaro related work?
You missed the mention of Lava mode. So yes, there is a Lava mode that allows you to edit Lava JSON files and submit them to the Lava server and then track your results. And you can then stick bits of eLisp into your JSON file so you can do things dynamically as you start up. I can show you some of that after this.
Yep.
Okay, next.
So I'll put my hands up and say I haven't used EMACS for a little while. I'm an ex-EMACS user. I'm now in marketing, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
But so my name's Matt Spencer. Like I say, I'm not using a current version of EMACS. I've actually got Sublime Text open here. I'm sorry, but I found EMACS a bit clunky to use on Windows. How long have I been using it? I started using it in about 2001, so a fair while. What packages? I must admit, when I started using it again recently, I went back to trying to use vanilla EMACS because I found it made it easier for me to move from one desktop to another. All my peers thought I was mad and should be using Vi because it was, Vi is available on everything, and EMACS is a bit bigger and heavier. And actually, they did have a point that if you don't know how to use sort of vanilla Vi and you log on to a server, the chances are it'll have Vi there and not EMACS. So I did have to teach myself the basics of Vi.
I think we all do, don't we?
Yes.
Everyone knows how to edit file and then exit. That's it.
Yeah, escape for a long WQ. So.
I never sudo EMACS.
So two things I've found. So one for the configuration, because you're right. If you spend any time configuring EMACS, it becomes very comfortable, and then you get a vanilla EMACS, and it's confusing. So I have all my eLisp configuration on GitHub, and on the top of it, there's a little thing that I just paste, which does a wget pipe to bash that installs all my dot files and all my eLisp, so I can set up a new machine in seconds. And the other one I found is a lovely little editor called Xyle, which I think has just changed its name to something else upstream. It's Xyle and Debian, but I think the upstream, last time I was putting it into the open embedded, in the build root repository, they changed the name. Anyway, it is, Xyle is a lossy EMACS, so it's not got all the eLisp in it, but it's got all the basic familiar key bindings. It starts up as fast as Vi, so if I'm just editing a config file, I tend to use that.
I think the thing I liked about EMACS when I first started using it was it reminded me of ZAP, where I came from before then.
Sorry, what was that?
ZAP, it was on the Acorn Archimedes. It was a great editor.
Still misses that.
So the first editor I remember using professionally was one called Brief. Did anyone else use Brief? Yeah. Which had quite good macro capabilities at the time, and I remember it could also do rectangle cutouts. But yeah. All right, thank you. Who's left? Wookie.
So I am in fact barely an EMACS user because I've been using JED for the last 15 years, which is like Xyle, a small primitive mini EMACS, which didn't take 30 seconds to start. Outside-in editor user, not an inside-out editor user. I never liked that. So the whole, editor file name, that's all I do all day, and it's very annoying if that takes too long. So 15 years ago, I didn't run EMACS for that reason, and I've been quite happy with JED. It's a reasonable editor. It uses Scheme instead of as a Lisp implementation. But it would appear that pretty much nobody else in the world is still using it. So I'm now the Debian maintainer, as the last person in the world that cares. So I thought I'm going to have to find out how proper EMACS works. And it turns out it starts really fast now on a modern computer. It's much improved. And there's this whole daemon thing, so you don't have to care. And it does loads of things. It's great. Except that I don't know how to use any of them. So I've discovered org mode because someone showed it me, and I've been doing that for years. I do everything in text files with underlines and things, and obviously org mode actually makes that rather more efficient, or would if I learned all the keys for folding things up. So I really like that, but I'm not actually using it much because I keep forgetting the keystrokes, and I've got too many machines that are still configured with editor equals JED, so I'm always being dragged back to JED world. But yeah, as you say, Xyle is incredibly handy because that's another mini EMACS, and it's actually smaller than JED. JED's about 2 megabytes with its dependencies. Xyle's like 250K. Yes, so I increasingly install that. Because otherwise, everywhere I go, I have to ask the admin of the machine, if it's not mine, to please install JED before I can type anything, and MC, and most. Which turns out nobody else ever uses.
What's most?
Most is better, less. It's great.
More, less,
it's
most.
Sort of curses less, so it's a bit fancier. Yeah. So I really know nothing. So last week at DebConf, an enthusiastic EMACS user was showing me that I can control XF over SSH connections to random other machines, and you go, wow, that is so cool, because that means I don't have to use fish, which is the shitty SSH FS thing that predates SSHFS, which is much better than fish, but having it all integrated would be amazing.
Was that the first time you came across tramp mode then?
What mode?
Tramp.
I've never heard of a thing called trap mode.
Tramp stands for Transparent Remote Access something. But it's the framework that EMACS uses, and there's a Tramp ADB, so you can access stuff on your Android devices. There's SSH, which it does. And I think if really pushed, Tramp can just end up pulling and pushing files back and forth using FTP if it gets that desperate.
Yeah, he said he did FTP as well. So right, okay. So I have to install something called Tramp.
Tramp has been part of EMACS forever.
Okay, so. Right. So yeah, there were a whole lot of other fancy things I was shown, most of which I've forgotten already. But I still don't really know how to find out anything. There's all those different sorts of help. What's this function called? I don't know yet. What's the key binding that will give me the thing I want? I don't know. I don't know what it's called. I don't know what its key is.
Yeah, they use silly names.
Like Tramp. Yes, it is a little bit. I'm sure if I Googled for stuff, I could discover all. So and the other thing, someone needs to tell me how to get rid of the "you're a complete novice" code taking up half my window every time I start EMACS, because that's starting to get annoying. Because I've read the tutorial.
I've got it in my .emacs. There's some set.
I got as far as editing, looking at the .emacs file and not finding an object. There were a load of options. In fact, there was a mode for editing my config file, which was quite cool. But I couldn't find an obvious option, which was please take away the startup window for idiots. So that's about how much of a competent EMACS user I am.
I will have to look at my init file to see what the actual variable is. In terms of key bindings and finding out things for modes, so default EMACS has a command mx desc binds, I think, which will describe all the bindings in the current buffer that you're in. I use a thing called Helm desc binds, which is yet another variant of Helm, which will basically narrow, so you can either search by, I remember it starts with C, with Control A or whatever, and it will narrow down all the results based on the key bindings or by the name, and then it's a really nice way of finding it, and you can execute it from there, and then eventually you'll remember the key binding that you're meant to use.
So just to go back to your first gripe, it's initial dash search dash message. You set that to nil. Sorry, did I say search? I meant scratch. Yeah.
Right, yeah, so scratch.
Are there any other questions we didn't answer there?
So I should also say I use, we're talking about using email inside your EMACS. So I use MUT and have done for years, and it's great. But I use it on a remote server. So I SSH to my MUT, so it's always running wherever I am, and I always have the same mail view with all the mail in it, as opposed to having to copy mail to all my machines. Disadvantage, of course, is that whenever I go offline, I've got no email, which is quite annoying. But then again, I haven't got 8 gigabytes of email on every machine with IMAP, remote IMAP. Yeah. So I presume, I suppose maybe this tramp thing, I could remote through my EMACS to another. I'm not quite sure whether there'd be any point. So I do IRC the same way. IRC runs on a server and I connect to it, so it's always there.
Yeah. So I think the easiest solution is to run. So what I have is I have a local EMACS that I run on my Chromebook, just so I can edit files quickly. But I tend to also keep a persistent EMACS running on my home machine, where I keep the bulk of my email, so I can send and receive email from that machine, so I just get SSH in. Yeah, I think Tramp, you could probably hack something together with Tramp to do it, but I bet it would be slow. So you probably don't want to. I mean, Tramp's good for editing individual files, I think, if you're going to start pulling across entire trees. Well, so Tramp tries very hard to get something working. So if you've just got SSH, but nothing much on the user space on the other side, it'll try and encode all the files up using eLisp and then move them across and then decode them. You can improve the performance by making sure it's got a few tools like UU-encode or whatever on the remote side. So when I was working in the embedded world, I always used to make sure that there are a couple of binaries that Tramp would look for when it first starts its session to make sure it could do things the most efficient way it could.
How long do we have left?
I don't know.
Is there enough time for you to show us some cool stuff?
Yeah, so what did you want to see?
What do you want us to see?
Cool.
Cool stuff.
Stuff sufficiently inspiring that we bothered to learn the keys for it.
Is that enough?
Yeah.
So I'll show you the Helm desk binds that I have. So this is basically shows you all of the keys that are currently mapped in this binding, and what we're in eLisp, so I bet there's something that involves S expression. And then the nice thing about Helm narrowing is you can basically put spaces between your groups of letters, so you don't have to say search for F and then sexp to find forward sexp. You can do sexpf and it'll find forward sexp. So yeah, and this is. So that shows. So these are global bindings, but this is just a good way to remind yourself what the key bindings are for whatever you're doing. Let me see if I can get my other terminal across.
So something I've failed to understand, some conceptual things that I haven't really grasped about how EMACS works. So there's global bindings and there's per mode bindings. So I can have one key that does something, but it depends which mode I'm in. And there's major modes and there's minor modes. And I haven't really understood how this affects which keys you use to get stuff done, and what you load when, and does that affect all my buffers at once or just the buffer it's in? And
right. Okay. The quick overview of key bindings. Global bindings exist in all modes, and then you have major mode, and there will only ever be one major mode for a buffer, and that's generally your programming mode or whatever it is that you're doing in that buffer, and that will have its key bindings. And then you can have any number of minor modes. So if you look at it's slightly truncated. So that's my major mode, eLisp. So I've got a bunch of major key bindings of that. I'm not entirely sure what that is. That's a guide key. That's fly check. That's eProject. So they're all the other minor modes that are running that enhance particular things. So eProject is a project-based mode. And the order of precedence goes, I think, if basically, global keys can get overridden by major and minor modes. And I think major modes can get overridden by minor modes. If you read the manual, it tells you exactly the order that it goes in. So basically, there is a unique key map for every buffer that you're in that's built up from all these various modes, and that's how it works out. And that's what all the despines is really doing, is it's loading up the key map and deconstructing it to work out what it's pointing at. Fly check. It's what's underlining all my eLisp. Hold on a second. I need multiple fingers for this. So it's a on-the-fly syntax checking. It's multiple languages. So it's just complaining that because I've not got SMTP mail required at the top of this file, there's a whole bunch of free assignments to stuff here.
Do you know about the package, which is really useful when demoing EMACS, that displays the keys you're pressing as you press them? It's just sort of an overlay. It's ever so handy.
What's it called?
I don't know. I've forgotten. Somebody who was demoing EMACS stuff.
Is it part of EMACS,
I'm
or
not
is it
sure.
just some
it may well be
X
part of the
thing?
GUI, actually, that just shows you the shift and control. No.
Quite commonly on YouTube things, so the person's talking, typing, see what he's doing.
Yeah, it all kind of falls down on a Chromebook, because I either have Chrome or at the moment this EMACS is running in a terminal, but obviously that means it's all in terminal mode. And when it's running full screen, I can't have any other X things doing stuff in full screen. But that's mainly because I choose to suffer with this proprietary operating system.
E-projects seem really cool to me. I must confess I still don't know really much about exactly hacking into projects and
So there are lots of various project solutions for EMACS. I think one of the more popular ones is one called Projectile, which a lot of people use. I use eProject mainly because I can make statements like this. Oh, Wookie would like this one. So you see the define project type Debian package. So all that says is it looks to see if there's the directory Debian in it, and then that will treat the directory that has the Debian in it as the root directory of the project. And then I have these things.
Remember my key for me, genius.
Yeah. And I have these things called common compiles, which are just tags that I've got that I use elsewhere in my bindings. So when I hit Control CC to compile something, it offers me a pre-populated history of things that are likely to build for that. So for example, for Debian, I have my dpackage stuff. For Android projects, it does whatever you need to do for Android, and for my kernel compiles, it automatically.
Pretty sure -r fake root has been the default for some time, so you don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, this was back in the day when I actually built Debian packages. But yeah, so I kind of prefer this way than explicitly specifying each package, but it's each to their own. Projectile is certainly worth looking at, and it's more actively developed than eProject is. The guy that developed eProject developed it, it works. There's not really any bugs in it, but he doesn't seem particularly receptive to patches to extend it, so I effectively got my own personal fork of it.
It's just really quick to switch going styles, like
It's really handy for that, and you get so if I do. That's my normal buffer switch. That's the normal iBuffer display, and if I do it from let me just hold on a sec. I need multiple hands. So when I do it from a Control XP from something that's running eProject mode, then it automatically limits the buffer list to stuff within that project. And then, of course, you can always come out and see all your buffers. But it's handy if you, like me, tend to have a couple of hundred files open in your EMACS at any one time. Oh, there's another one I'll mention which I use. I use this thing called Lusty EMACS, which is a port of a Vim package, but it's basically a fuzzy matching, so I can go CPU exec.c, and then you just hit tab and it opens up. So it's just a nice way for navigating. It does it for the file interface, and it does it for the buffer switching interface, so you can... I do uniquify buffer names as well. But I haven't, because this is my portable machine. I'm not actually looking at multiple versions of the project at the moment. So. Anything else?
Is there a tool for Eatherpad?
Eatherpad? No, I think because Eatherpad is JavaScripty magic. It's very hard to edit as a text area. I was mentioning to Wookie earlier that some of the JavaScript libraries that you use for building these rich text widgets do actually expose an API. And when I have more of my copious free time, I was pondering tweaking edit with EMACS to directly talk with those to edit and insert text. But feel free to hack that up yourself if you want. Are these fellow EMACS users that arrived, or are they waiting for the next session? No, right. Anything else, or shall we wrap it up there?
What do you use for an HTML editor?
Web mode. Will mentioned there's NXHTML mode, which was an older mode that attempted to use this feature called multiple major modes to switch modes depending on whether you're in your JSP and your XML or whatever. Web mode isn't quite that advanced, but it breaks an awful lot less, and it prettifies. If you open up some PHP, it prettifies it, and syntax highlights the right bits where you expect.
I was horrified to discover the youth of today can't edit HTML. They have no idea what you're talking about. They've never seen it before. I do nothing but use the web, but they don't know what HTML is. It's boggling.
I remember before HTML was a thing. So, okay, any more? If anyone wants a demo of Lava mode, come and speak to me afterwards, and I can show you when I'm not quite constrained on the screen. Okay, well, thank you all very much. It's good to know there are other EMACS users around.